The champagne sparkled under the office lights as everyone celebrated our project's massive success. The system I'd built from scratch was running flawlessly, generating millions in revenue. But when the promotions were announced, my name wasn't there. Instead, they gave it to a male colleague who'd barely contributed. As I stood there, invisible in my own triumph, a single thought crystallized. If your life's work can be erased with a pen stroke, what happens when you hold the eraser? My name is Emily Carter, and I've spent the last 5 years building systems that nobody else could understand, let alone replicate. At 32, I was the youngest senior data engineer at Nexus Technologies, though you'd never know it from how they treated me at the product launch party that night. The conference room buzzed with self-congratulation. Mark Reynolds, our department head, stood at the podium delivering his practice speech about collaborative excellence and team synergy. I watched from the back corner, nursing a glass of lukewarm champagne that tasted like defeat. The dashboard projected behind him, my dashboard, the one I'd coded through 300 sleepless nights, displayed real-time metrics showing 40 million in quarterly revenue. Every algorithm, every data pipeline, every optimization trick had my fingerprints on it. And special recognition goes to Brad Thompson, Mark announced, raising his glass toward my colleague who joined the project 6 weeks before launch. His leadership truly drove this success. Leadership. Brad's contribution had been scheduling meetings and forwarding my technical reports with his name added to the CC line. I felt my phone vibrate. A Slack message from Sarah, the only other woman on our team. This is bullshit and everyone knows it. After the applause died down, I made my way to Mark's office. The hallway felt longer than usual, each fluorescent light overhead highlighting the bitter irony of the employee excellence posters lining the walls. "Emily, come in," Mark said, without looking up from his laptop. His office smelled of leather and the kind of cologne that screamed middle management. "I know what you're going to say." "Do you?" I kept my voice steady, professional. 5 years of swallowing my pride had taught me that emotional women don't get promoted. They get managed out. He finally looked up, offering that patronizing smile I'd seen 100 times before. "Look, you're brilliant. Nobody disputes that. But Brad has presence, executive presence. The board responds to that." He leaned back, hands behind his head. "Company policy dictates we need leaders who can represent us at the highest levels. You understand?" Company policy. The same excuse when they passed me over last year, and the year before that. "I built that entire system," I said, each word carefully measured. "The patent applications have my name on them, the architecture documents, the code reviews, the client presentations when Brad was mysteriously unavailable. And you've been compensated fairly for your contributions." Mark's tone shifted. Harder now. "Your bonus will reflect your excellent technical work, but leadership positions require more than technical skills. More than technical skills. More than working until 3 in the morning debugging critical failures. More than saving the company from a data breach that would have cost millions. More than being the only person who actually understood how our entire data infrastructure worked." I stood up, smoothing my blazer. "I see. Thank you for clarifying." "Emily," Mark called as I reached the door. "You're valuable here. Don't do anything rash." I turned back, offering my own smile now. Not the eager, hoping to please smile I'd worn for years, but something else entirely. Something that made Mark shift uncomfortably in his $800 ergonomic chair. "Of course not," I said. "I'm nothing if not calculated." Back at my desk, I pulled up a folder on my personal drive labeled Insurance. Inside was a scanned copy of a contract from 3 years ago, when they'd threatened to outsource our entire department. I'd negotiated the software licensing agreement with our primary vendor back then, adding a small provision that seemed like a formality at the time. A single paragraph that stated the enterprise license was valid only while lead data engineer Emily Carter remained an active, recognized employee in good standing with full acknowledgement of her role. They'd signed it without reading the fine print. After all, I was just a technical resource, not someone who understood legal documents. I closed my laptop and looked around the open office. Brad was holding court near the break room, explaining his system to a group of junior developers. Mark was on a call, probably telling the executives about the successful launch. Everyone was riding high on a victory built on my sleepless nights and stolen recognition. They had no idea what was coming. The beauty of being invisible is that nobody sees you planting the seeds of their own destruction, and I'd been planting for 3 years. The champagne had gone flat, but I raised my glass anyway, toasting silently to the empty air. Here's to company policy. Here's to executive presence. Here's to the moment when they realized that the technical resource they'd overlooked was the only thing keeping their $40 million revenue stream from becoming a $40 million lawsuit. The silence that would follow would be deafening, and I would orchestrate every note. The memory hit me that night as I sat in my apartment, laptop open, staring at the contract that would become my weapon. 3 years ago, almost to the day, I'd been called into an emergency meeting at 7:30 p.m. The executives had discovered they could save $12 million annually by outsourcing our entire data infrastructure to an offshore team. "It's nothing personal, Emily," the CFO had said, sliding a termination timeline across the conference table. "But the numbers don't lie." The numbers, everything in their world came down to numbers. Except when it came to recognizing who actually generated them. I'd spent that entire night dissecting our vendor agreements, looking for leverage, for anything that would make me indispensable. That's when I found it. The enterprise software license that powered our entire analytics platform was up for renewal. Data Vault Systems, our primary vendor, had a peculiar CEO named Richard Vaughn, old school, believed in handshake deals and loyalty. I'd maintained our relationship for years, troubleshooting their software, providing feedback that helped them improve their product. Richard trusted me, not Nexus Technologies, me. "Richard," I'd said during our renewal call at 6 a.m. the next morning, my voice carefully casual, "I need to add a small provision to our agreement. Nothing major, just something to ensure continuity of service." "What kind of provision?" he'd asked. "The license should remain valid only while the primary technical administrator maintains their recognized position. It's a security measure, ensures no one can tamper with the system without proper authorization." Richard had laughed. "You mean you want to make sure they can't fire you and hand this over to someone who doesn't know what they're doing?" "Something like that," I'd admitted. "Smart girl, send me the language." The provision I drafted was a masterpiece of legal precision disguised as technical jargon. It specified that the multi-million-dollar enterprise license was contingent upon lead data engineer Emily Carter remaining in her role with full recognition and compensation commensurate with her position. Any change in status, title, or recognition would trigger an immediate license review and potential invalidation. The legal department had skimmed it, seen the technical terminology, and assumed it was standard security protocol. Mark had signed off without reading past the first paragraph. The executives were too focused on the 5-year price lock I'd negotiated to notice the trap I'd embedded in subsection 12, paragraph 4. I pulled up the email chain from that time. Reading Mark's response. "Excellent work, Emily. This kind of forward thinking is what makes you such a valuable technical resource." Technical resource. Even when I'd saved them from outsourcing, saved their jobs, I was still just a resource to them. Over the following months, I'd carefully woven that contract into the fabric of our operations. Every system, every database, every analytics tool was built on the Data Vault platform. I made sure of it. When other engineers suggested alternatives, I had perfectly logical reasons why Data Vault was superior. When executives questioned the dependency, I showed them the cost savings, the performance metrics, the seamless integration. Nobody questioned the quiet woman who made everything work. Nobody thought to ask why I was so insistent on using this particular vendor. They just saw the results. Clean data, beautiful dashboards, insights that drove million-dollar decisions. I'd even documented everything meticulously, creating what looked like standard operating procedures but were actually breadcrumbs leading back to that single paragraph in the contract. Every technical document referenced the licensing agreement. Every training manual mentioned the critical importance of maintaining vendor relationships. Every system architecture diagram had a small note about license validation requirements. If anyone had been paying attention, they would have seen it. But I was invisible. Remember the woman behind the curtain that nobody bothered to look at while they applauded the wizard? Now, sitting in my dark apartment with only the glow of my screen illuminating the room, I opened a new email to Richard Vaughn. The subject line was simple: License Compliance Review Requested. The body was equally brief. Richard, I need to make you aware of a potential compliance issue with our current agreement. It appears there may be some organizational changes that could affect the validity of our license. Could we schedule a call to discuss? I didn't hit send, not yet. That email would sit in my drafts, waiting for the perfect moment. First, I needed to ensure everything was in place. Every piece of evidence, every documentation trail, every proof that I was the lead data engineer referenced in that contract. My phone buzzed. Another Slack message from Sarah. Heard Brad's getting a 30% raise with his promotion. They're announcing it Monday. 30%. For 6 weeks of pretending to understand my work. I closed Slack and opened a new folder on my personal drive, Endgame. Inside, I began organizing 3 years of evidence. 3 years of preparation for a moment I'd hoped would never come but somehow always knew would. They thought they were denying me a promotion. In reality, they were lighting a fuse I'd placed 3 years ago, and the explosion would cost them far more than 30% of Brad's inflated salary. The next morning, I arrived at the office at 6:45 a.m., an hour before anyone else. The empty floor felt different now. Not peaceful, but pregnant with possibility. I methodically began my evidence collection, moving through our systems like a ghost claiming her possessions. First, the emails. 5 years of correspondence showing my role, my responsibilities, my contributions. I forwarded them to my personal account in small batches, careful not to trigger any security alerts. The email where Mark explicitly called me our lead data engineer when introducing me to clients. The one where the CEO thanked me personally for single-handedly saving our Q3 projections. The thread where Brad asked me to explain basic SQL queries 2 months ago. Next, the Slack archives. Our company kept everything for compliance reasons. A policy I'd actually helped implement. I downloaded conversation after conversation. Brad asking me to fix his code, to review his presentations, to help him understand the system architecture. My favorite was from 3 weeks ago. Emily, can you write up how the algorithm works? I need to explain it to the board tomorrow. My response had been detailed, comprehensive. His follow-up, thanks, I'll simplify this for them. Simplify? He'd read my explanation word for word and taken credit for understanding it. The version control system told an even clearer story. GitLab didn't lie. Every commit, every change, every line of code had an author. My username appeared on 92% of the core system commits. Brad's appeared on 4%, all of them cosmetic changes to documentation or variable names. I exported the entire commit history, 10,000 lines of incontrovertible proof of who had actually built this system. But the real treasure was in the design documents. I pulled up the original system architecture I drafted on a coffee-stained napkin during a midnight brainstorming session, later formalized into a 100-page technical specification. My name was watermarked into the metadata, something I'd done deliberately, knowing that most people never check document properties. Even the PDFs Brad had created for executive presentations showed me as the original author when you looked beneath the surface. I created a subdirectory called Patent Applications and smiled. 3 patents, all listing me as the primary inventor. The company had filed them. Yes, but patent law was funny about inventorship. You couldn't just remove an inventor because they were inconvenient. Brad's name appeared nowhere on these documents. The financial analysis came next. I'd kept meticulous records of system performance metrics, correlating them with revenue increases. Every optimization I'd implemented had a measurable impact. The clustering algorithm that increased processing speed by 40%, saving $2 million annually in server costs. The predictive model that identified high-value customers with 94% accuracy, directly generating $8 million in upsells. The real-time anomaly detection that prevented 3 potential data breaches, each of which could have cost tens of millions in regulatory fines. All documented, all with my digital signature. I opened our vendor management portal and took screenshots of every interaction with Data Vault systems. 3 years of support tickets, all assigned to me, feature requests, all submitted by me. Even the executive business reviews were scheduled through my calendar. In the eyes of our most critical vendor, I wasn't just the lead engineer, I was the only engineer they knew. The coffee maker gurgled to life behind me. 7:30 a.m. People would start arriving soon. I switched to my normal work screen but kept my personal laptop open beside me, continuing the careful documentation transfer through my phone's hotspot. "You're here early," a voice said behind me. Brad. Of course, probably trying to look dedicated after his promotion windfall. "Just reviewing the system metrics," I replied without turning around. The overnight processing had some interesting anomalies. "Anything I should know about?" His voice carried that new note of authority he'd been practicing. I finally turned, offering him a bland smile. "Nothing you'd understand without context. I'll handle it." His face reddened slightly. "Well, as the new team lead, I should be kept informed of all system issues." Team lead. Not even announced yet, and already throwing his weight around. "Of course," I said, turning back to my screen. "I'll send you the raw logs, all 40,000 lines. I'm sure you'll find them illuminating." He hesitated for a moment, then walked away. I heard him telling someone by the coffee machine about managing technical personalities and establishing clear hierarchies. I added the interaction to my log, then opened one final folder, Legal Precedents. Over the past 2 years, I'd quietly researched similar cases, companies that had lost access to critical systems due to contract violations. The damages ranged from hundreds of thousands to hundreds of millions, depending on the revenue impact and contract terms. Data Vault Systems Vive. Pinnacle Corp was particularly relevant. A $50 million judgment when Pinnacle violated licensing terms by restructuring their technical team without vendor notification. The judge had ruled that specialized software licenses containing specific personnel provisions must be strictly honored, as the vendor has a legitimate interest in ensuring qualified oversight of their technology. I had plenty of qualified oversight. What I was about to lose was recognition of it. My phone vibrated. An Outlook notification. Team meeting, 2 p.m., organizational updates. The announcement. I saved my final files, encrypted the backup drive, and leaned back in my chair. Everything was ready. 3 years of preparation, 5 years of evidence, and one carefully crafted contractual clause that was about to become a $10 million lesson in why you shouldn't ignore the person who holds your technical infrastructure together. The cracks started small, like hairline fractures in glass before it shatters. It began with Jake from the infrastructure team, a sharp kid who actually read documentation. I watched him from across the open office as he pulled up the Data Vault licensing agreement on his monitor at 3:20 p.m., 2 days after the announcement of Brad's promotion. His forehead creased. He scrolled down, then back up. He opened another tab, our organizational chart, then back to the contract. I saw the exact moment he found it, his eyes widened, and he immediately minimized the window, glancing around nervously. Within an hour, the whispers started. Not obvious ones. Tech teams had learned to be subtle after too many culture-fit terminations, but I could see it in the way conversations stopped when Brad walked by, in the sideways glances during his technical briefing that afternoon, where he badly mangled an explanation of our caching strategy. "Emily." Jake approached my desk around 4 p.m., voice low. "Can I ask you something? Hypothetical?" I didn't look up from my code review. Hypothetical questions are my favorite kind. If someone's name was specifically mentioned in a critical vendor contract and that person's role changed, would that matter? "Depends on the contract language," I said evenly. Contracts are funny things. Sometimes a single word can mean the difference between valid and void. He shifted nervously. "And if it was a software license, like, for something mission critical?" I finally looked up, meeting his eyes with perfect calm. Then I imagined someone should probably review that contract very carefully, hypothetically. Jake practically ran back to his desk. Within minutes, I saw him on Slack, his fingers flying across the keyboard. The infrastructure team had their own channel, one they thought was private. They'd forgotten I'd set up the integration permissions 3 years ago. Holy shit! Look at Section 12.4 of the Data Vault Agreement. Is that even legal? Legal and enforceable. I just checked. Emily negotiated this when they tried to outsource us. Does Brad know? Does Mark know? We're running everything on Data Vault. Everything. I continued working. Expression neutral. while the technical teams collectively discovered what I'd known for 3 years. The beauty of being underestimated is that people never suspect you're capable of playing the long game. By 5:15 p.m., the panic had spread to the senior engineers. Tom, who'd been with the company for 8 years, stood up abruptly from his desk and walked straight to Mark's office. The door closed, but through the glass, I could see animated gestures. Tom pointing at his laptop screen, Mark's face shifting from confusion to concern. Brad, meanwhile, was conducting a technical leadership workshop in the main conference room. Completely oblivious to the storm gathering around him, I could hear his voice carrying across the floor. The key to managing technical resources is establishing clear hierarchies and ownership models. Technical resources, still using that phrase. Sarah messaged me directly. Emily, did you know about the contract clause? I negotiated it, I replied simply. Jesus Christ, do you know what this means? I know exactly what it means. The 3 dots indicating she was typing appeared and disappeared several times. Finally, they're fucked, aren't they? I didn't respond, but I did allow myself a small smile as I watched Mark's office door open and Tom emerge, looking pale. Mark immediately picked up his phone, probably calling legal. The next morning, the atmosphere was electric with suppressed panic. The entire infrastructure team was in by 7 a.m., unprecedented for a group that usually strolled in around 9:30. They were running system audits, checking dependencies, trying to figure out exactly how deeply Data Vault was embedded in our operations. The answer, which I could have told them, was completely every database query, every analytics process, every customer-facing dashboard, every internal report, all of it ran through Data Vault's enterprise platform. It wasn't just mission-critical, it was the mission. Emergency architecture review, Brad announced, trying to project authority while sweat beaded on his forehead. We need to assess our vendor dependencies. I raised my hand. I have complete documentation of our Data Vault integration. Would you like me to present it? He hesitated, caught between needing my expertise and maintaining his position. Just send me the files. I'll review and present them. Of course, I said. I sent him 800 pages of technical documentation, knowing he wouldn't understand a tenth of it. Let me know if you need any clarification on the implementation details. The murmurs grew louder throughout the day. Legal had been in Mark's office 3 times. HR had pulled all the original contract files. The CFO had canceled his afternoon meetings. Around 2 p.m., I overheard a conversation by the printer between 2 junior developers. It literally says, lead data engineer Emily Carter must remain in recognized position. But they just promoted Brad over her. Exactly. Which means we might be in breach. Can they just change her title back? After publicly announcing Brad, after what they did to her, would you accept that? Fuck no. Yeah, we're screwed. I walked past them to get water, and they fell silent. In the kitchen, I found Jake stress-eating his 3rd bag of chips. Emily, he said quietly, you knew this would happen. It wasn't a question. I knew the contract terms, I said, filling my water bottle. I negotiated them to protect the company's technical infrastructure. By making yourself irreplaceable, I turned to look at him directly. By ensuring that the person who actually understands this system remains in a position to maintain it. Tell me, Jake, can Brad debug a distributed cache invalidation issue? Can he optimize a recursive query that's eating up CPU cycles? Can he explain to Data Vault why our custom implementation needs specific kernel-level access? Jake's silence was answer enough. I didn't make myself irreplaceable, I continued. I've trained 6 people, including you, on various aspects of this system. What I did was make my recognition non-negotiable. As I walked back to my desk, I passed the executive conference room. Through the glass, I could see Mark, the CFO, the head of legal, and, interestingly, no Brad. Their faces were grim, laptop screens full of what looked like contract language. The first crack had become a spiderweb of fractures. All it would take now was the slightest pressure for everything to shatter. The email that lit the fuse was beautifully simple. Monday morning, 8:47 a.m. I sent a 3-line message to the internal legal department with the subject line, FYI, Compliance issue with Data Vault license agreement. Team, I wanted to ensure you're aware of a potential compliance matter regarding our Data Vault enterprise license. Per Section 12.4 of our agreement, there appear to be inconsistencies with current organizational structures. Please advise on appropriate next steps. I CC'd no one, added no drama, no threats, just a professional engineer doing her due diligence. Then I went to the break room and made myself a cup of tea. By 9:15 a.m., I could see Jennifer from legal practically sprinting to Mark's office, laptop clutched against her chest. Through the glass walls, those transparent barriers they'd installed to promote openness and collaboration, I watched her pull up documents on Mark's screen, pointing at specific paragraphs with increasing urgency. Mark's face went through a fascinating evolution: confusion, understanding, disbelief, and finally, a kind of pale horror that made him look like he'd aged 5 years in 5 minutes. By 10 a.m., Brad's technical leadership sync meeting had been mysteriously canceled. He stood in the middle of the open office, looking lost, still clutching his prepared presentation about leveraging human resources for maximum efficiency. "Did anyone else get the cancellation?" he asked loudly. The few developers who made eye contact just shrugged and turned back to their screens. Everyone knew something was happening. Only Brad seemed oblivious. HR arrived at 10:30 a.m., not just our department rep, but the Chief Human Resources Officer herself, Patricia Weinstein, who I'd seen in person exactly twice in 5 years. She walked past my desk without acknowledgement, her heels clicking a sharp staccato against the floor as she disappeared into Mark's increasingly crowded office. Sarah rolled her chair over to mine. "The entire leadership team is freaking out. Tom said they've called an emergency board meeting for this afternoon." I kept my eyes on my code review. "Interesting. Emily, did you plan this?" "I planned for contingencies," I said carefully. "When they threatened to outsource us 3 years ago, I ensured our critical infrastructure couldn't be compromised by organizational instability. By making yourself the organizational stability, by documenting the importance of institutional knowledge." She laughed, sharp and bitter. "They're going to come for you. You know that, right? Let them come." At 11:45 a.m., the paralegal arrived. Not Jennifer, not even someone from our usual legal team, but an external consultant with a visitor badge and a Prada suit that probably cost more than my monthly salary. She commandeered Conference Room A and started laying out documents across the table like she was planning a military campaign. The lunch hour was surreal. The executive floor was chaos, doors slamming, phones ringing, people half running between offices. The engineering floor was dead silent, everyone pretending to work while refreshing Slack every 30 seconds for updates. Jake had found more details. The license validation runs through Data Vault's central servers every 24 hours. If it fails 3 consecutive checks, the system locks. "When was the last validation?" someone asked. "This morning at 6 a.m., so we have maybe 48 hours before complete shutdown." "Can't we just spoof the validation?" "It's cryptographically signed. We'd need Data Vault's private key." "What about rolling back to an older version?" "All our data is in their proprietary format. Rolling back means losing everything since the upgrade. 3 years of data." Brad finally seemed to grasp that something was wrong. He approached the cluster of engineers, trying to assert authority. "What's this about a system shutdown? Why wasn't I informed?" Tom looked at him with barely concealed contempt. "Because you were too busy practicing your leadership workshop to read the critical infrastructure documentation Emily sent you last week." I delegated that review to who? "Brad. Who did you delegate understanding our entire system architecture to?" The room went quiet. Brad's face flushed red. "I don't appreciate your tone. As team lead." "You're not my team lead," Tom interrupted. "According to our vendor contract, Emily is the lead engineer. Says so right there in legally binding writing." At 2 p.m., Mark emerged from his office. He looked haggard, his usual polished appearance crumbling around the edges. His eyes found me across the floor. "Emily, my office, now." I saved my work, pushed back from my desk with deliberate calm, and walked through the silent office. Every eye followed me, some with sympathy, some with awe. most with a kind of morbid curiosity about what would happen when an unstoppable force met an immovable contract. Patricia from HR was there, along with Jennifer from legal and the external consultant. Brad was notably absent. "Sit," Mark said. It wasn't a request. I sat, crossing my legs, maintaining eye contact. "You know what you've done," he started. "I've ensured the continuity and security of our critical infrastructure," I replied evenly, "as has been my job for 5 years. You've created a hostage situation. I've created an accountability mechanism. There's a difference." The external consultant, her badge said Monica Chen, leaned forward. "Ms. Carter, are you aware that your actions could be construed as corporate sabotage?" "Are you aware," I countered, "that denying recognition and compensation to a named party in a vendor contract while continuing to benefit from their work could be construed as fraud?" The room went silent. Patricia shifted uncomfortably. Jennifer was furiously taking notes. Mark's jaw clenched. "What do you want?" "What I've always wanted. Recognition for my work. Compensation commensurate with my contributions. The promotion that was given to someone who can't even explain how our caching system works." "That's not how this works." "Actually," Monica interrupted, "that's exactly how this works. Ms. Carter's name is specifically written into a contract your company signed. You have 3 options: honor the contract terms, negotiate a settlement, or lose access to your entire data infrastructure." Mark's face was turning an interesting shade of purple. "This is extortion." "This is contract law," Monica corrected. "And from what I've reviewed, Ms. Carter's position is ironclad." I stood up. "I'll give you 48 hours to figure out your next move. That's how long you have before the license validation fails. I'd suggest you use that time wisely." As I reached the door, Mark called out, "You planned this. 3 years ago. You planned this." I turned back, allowing myself the smallest smile. 3 years ago, you tried to fire my entire team to save money. I planned for survival. I gestured to the room full of panicking executives. "This is just the natural consequence of treating people like resources instead of recognizing their value." I walked out, leaving them to contemplate the cost of their organizational choices. 48 hours to realize that the person they'd overlooked, undervalued, and passed over wasn't just holding their data, I was holding their entire business model hostage. And the ransom was simply what I'd been worth all along. The collapse began at 6:07 a.m. on Wednesday. I was sitting in my breakfast nook, coffee steaming in front of me, laptop open to the company's system status page. The first alert came through as a soft ping: "Data Vault License Validation Warning. Compliance check failed." By 6:15 a.m., my phone was buzzing continuously. Slack, email, text messages, a digital symphony of panic. I turned it face down and took another sip of coffee. The dashboard I'd built, the one that had generated $40 million in revenue, went dark at 6:23 a.m. Not gradually, not with warning bells and flashing lights, just nothing. A blank screen where real-time analytics used to flow like blood through digital veins. I knew what was happening in the office without being there. The morning shift of our offshore team would have noticed first. Their automated reports failing to generate, their queries returning null. Then the East Coast sales team, logging in to find empty pipelines where customer data should be. By the time the West Coast woke up, it would be complete systems failure. My phone rang. Mark. I let it go to voicemail. It rang again. The CEO, David Harrison, a man who'd spoken to me exactly once in 5 years, at a holiday party where he'd called me Emma and praised my little database project. I let that go to voicemail too. At 7:30 a.m., I drove to the office, not because they'd called, but because I wanted to witness the aftermath firsthand. The parking lot was chaos, cars abandoned at angles, people half running toward the building. Through the glass lobby, I could see security guards trying to manage a crowd of employees who couldn't badge in because the access control system ran through Data Vault. I used my physical key, one of only 3 in existence, which I'd insisted on keeping for emergency purposes. The elevator was dead. Data Vault managed our smart building systems too. I took the stairs. The engineering floor was like a war room, laptops everywhere, cables strung between desks, people shouting across the space. Someone had brought in a whiteboard and was desperately trying to map our system dependencies. It looked like a spiderweb drawn by someone having a breakdown. Emily. Jake practically collapsed with relief when he saw me. Thank God. Can you... I'm just here to collect some personal items, I said calmly, walking past him toward my desk. Brad was in the center of the chaos, his shirt untucked, sweat staining his expensive collar. We need all hands to debug this, he shouted at me. This is not the time for... For what? I turned to face him, voice carrying across the floor. For pointing out that you don't even know how to access the debugging console, that you've been team lead for 72 hours and you can't even tell them which logs to check. The room went silent. The license is invalid, I continued, loud enough for everyone to hear. It's not a bug, it's not a glitch, it's a contract violation, and until that's resolved, every system we've built on Data Vault, which is everything, will remain locked. We'll sue Data Vault, someone shouted. Read the contract, I replied. Section 12.4. We agreed to binding arbitration, in Delaware, with damages capped at 10 times the annual license fee. That's $50 million we'd owe them if we're found in breach. The external consultant, Monica, appeared at the top of the stairs, having climbed 6 floors in her designer heels. Ms. Carter, we need to discuss terms. No, I said simply. You need to discuss terms. With Data Vault, I'm just an employee, a technical resource, as I've been reminded repeatedly. Patricia from HR stepped forward. Emily, please, the entire company is at stake. Customer data, financial records, everything. Everything I built, I interrupted. Everything I maintained. Everything I was told wasn't important enough to warrant a promotion or recognition. Funny how it's important now. My desk phone rang. The old analog line that IT had never bothered to remove. The caller ID showed an international number. I knew who it was before I answered. Richard, I said, putting him on speaker. The entire floor held its breath. Emily, my dear. Richard Vaughn's voice filled the space. I'm getting some very interesting alerts from your system. It seems we have a compliance issue. It seems we do. The contract is quite specific. Lead data engineer Emily Carter must remain in her recognized position, but I'm seeing organizational announcements about a Brad Thompson taking over technical leadership, rather confusing. Brad's face had gone past red to a kind of mottled purple. I'm sure it's just an administrative oversight, I said lightly. Richard chuckled. Administrative oversights in contracts tend to be expensive. My legal team is recommending immediate suspension of services until this is resolved. We can't risk liability by providing enterprise software to an organization that may not have authorized personnel managing it. That seems prudent, I agreed. Of course, if the proper personnel structures were restored, with appropriate documentation and recognition, we could resume services immediately. The contract is quite clear on that point. David Harrison, the CEO, had arrived, flanked by what looked like the entire C-suite. Mr. Vaughn, he said loudly. David Harrison here. I'm sure we can resolve this misunderstanding quickly. Mr. Harrison, I don't believe we've spoken before. I've always dealt directly with Emily. She's the only one who seems to understand both the technical and contractual aspects of our relationship. Yes, well, about that. In fact, Richard continued, I'm looking at 3 years of support tickets, feature requests, and technical discussions, every single one handled by Emily. As far as Data Vault is concerned, she is your technical infrastructure. The contract simply reflects that reality. The room was silent except for the useless hum of computers displaying error messages. I'll let you sort this out internally, Richard said. Emily, you have my direct line if you need anything. Data Vault values loyalty, especially from partners who've been with us from the beginning. The line went dead. I looked around the room, at Brad's deflated confusion, at Mark's barely contained rage, at David Harrison's calculating stare, at the dozens of engineers who'd watched me build this empire of code and data. The validation check runs again at 6 a.m. tomorrow, I announced. If the contract terms aren't met, the lockout becomes permanent. Not 48 hours, not a week. Permanent. Data Vault will consider the contract void, and you'll need to negotiate a new one, from scratch, at current market rates. How much? David asked quietly. With the enterprise features we're using, the scale we're operating at probably triple our current costs, plus migration fees, plus the 50 million in breach penalties, plus whatever customers sue us for when we can't access their data. I picked up my personal coffee mug, the one thing I'd actually come for, and headed for the stairs. "Where are you going?" Mark demanded. "Home," I said. "I'm just a technical resource, remember? And right now, you have a business problem. When you figure out that those are often the same thing, you know where to find me." As I walked down the stairs, I heard David Harrison say the words I'd waited 5 years to hear: "Get her back, whatever it takes." But it was too late for whatever it takes. Now it would cost them exactly what I was worth, and that price had just gone up considerably. The call from David Harrison came at 8:43 p.m. I was expecting it. What I wasn't expecting was his tone. Not angry or demanding, but defeated. "Emily," he said simply, "what's it going to take?" I set down my wine glass and muted the Netflix show I'd been half watching. "David, I think we both know the answer to that. The board is prepared to offer you the senior director position. Brad will be reassigned." "No." Silence, then, "No. Senior director was what I deserved 3 years ago. The situation has evolved." "Name your price." "Vice President of Data Architecture, reporting directly to you, not through Mark. Base salary of $450,000, 30% equity bonus, based on the revenue my systems generate, and Brad's termination." "We can't just fire Brad." "You were perfectly willing to fire my entire team 3 years ago to save money. Brad has been in his position for less than a week and has already cost you 48 hours of downtime. The board can do the math." I heard muffled voices in the background. David had me on speaker with what sounded like the entire board. "The equity bonus is excessive," someone said. 30% of 40 million is 12 million, I replied. "The breach penalty alone is 50 million. The lawsuits from customers will be double that. Your market cap has already dropped 8% in after-hours trading. Would you like me to continue with the math?" More muffled discussion. "We need guarantees," David said, "that you'll restore the systems immediately." "You'll get them. My attorney will send over the employment contract tonight." "Your attorney?" "Monica Roth. You met her earlier. She was consulting for your legal team. She's reconsidered her client base." The silence was delicious. "You planned this," David said, and unlike Mark's earlier accusation, this carried a note of almost admiration. "I protected myself," I corrected. "When a company shows you repeatedly that you're disposable, you ensure you're not. That's not planning. That's survival." "The board needs to discuss." "The board has 9 hours until the permanent lockout," I interrupted. "After that, Data Vault will require a new contract negotiation. Richard Vaughn has already informed me that he's had inquiries from 3 of your competitors about enterprise licenses. He's holding off out of loyalty to our working relationship. But business is business." "You're in contact with Vaughn." "I've been in contact with Richard for 3 years. Every feature your company uses, I specified it. Every optimization that cut your processing time, I designed it with Data Vault's engineers. Every custom module that gives you an edge over competitors. That was me working directly with their development team. I'm not just your lead engineer. David, I'm the only reason Data Vault considers you a partner rather than just another client." I heard a chair scrape, footsteps. Then David's voice came through clearer. He'd taken me off speaker. "Emily, I need to level with you. The damage is worse than you know. We've lost 3 major clients today. Amazon is threatening to pull their partnership. The SEC has opened an inquiry into whether we properly disclosed our vendor dependencies. This could destroy the company." "I know," I said quietly. "I've been watching the metrics." "You've been—" He stopped. "Of course you have. You built the monitoring systems." "David, I've given you 5 years of my life. I've built systems that generated hundreds of millions in revenue. I've saved you from breaches, optimized operations, created intellectual property worth tens of millions, and in return, I've been passed over, ignored, and treated like furniture. So yes, I'm watching your company implode. Because it was never really your company. It was built on my architecture, my code, my intelligence. You just owned the stock. What if we meet all your demands? Then you'll have your systems back by 6 a.m. tomorrow, and I'll spend the next 3 years making sure you never have this vulnerability again. But this time, I'll be doing it as someone whose value is recognized, compensated, and protected by contract. And if we don't, then at 6 a.m. tomorrow, you'll become a case study in every business school about the dangers of undervaluing critical talent. The company that lost everything because they wouldn't promote the right engineer. I heard him exhale slowly. I'll call you back within the hour. David, I said before he could hang up. One more thing. Mark Reynolds needs to be removed from any supervisory position over technical staff. He's had 5 years to recognize talent and has failed consistently. That's a liability you can't afford anymore. That's 4 terminations you're demanding. Brad, Mark, and 2 others you mentioned earlier. No, it's 4 corrections. 4 people who built their careers on others' work while contributing nothing. Dead weight is expensive, David, as you're learning. The callback came at 9:57 p.m. Not David this time, but the chairman of the board, James Wellington, a venture capitalist who'd turned a $50 million investment into a $2 billion stake. Ms. Carter, he said without preamble, we accept your terms, all of them. Monica Roth has already sent the contracts. We'll sign tonight. And the terminations will be handled by morning. Mark and Brad have already been informed. The others will receive their notices tonight. Then we have an agreement. Emily, James said, and his tone shifted to something almost paternal. You could have done this at any time in the last 3 years. Why now? I thought about the question, about the years of being overlooked, the nights of fixing critical issues while others took credit, the slow erosion of hope that merit would ever matter. Because this week, you didn't just pass me over, you celebrated it. You threw a party for Brad's promotion, made it public, made it clear that no matter what I did, I would never be valued. You crossed a line from neglect to insult, and that's when patience becomes pathetic. I see, and once you're vice president. Once I'm vice president, you'll have the most sophisticated data infrastructure in the industry. You'll have innovation that leaves competitors scrambling to catch up. You'll have someone who understands both the technology and the business strategy. Everything you thought Brad would bring, except I'll actually deliver it. How do we know you won't do this again? Because once I have what I've earned, I have no reason to. I'm not vindictive. James, I'm practical. This was never about revenge. It was about recognition. The $10 million in damages you're about to pay, that's just the cost of learning that lesson. I heard papers rustling. The contracts are signed. The announcement will go out at midnight. Your credentials and access will be updated immediately. And Data Vault. We've confirmed with Mr. Vaughn that services will resume at 6 a.m., pending verification of your new position. Then we're done here. Emily, James said as I was about to hang up. Welcome to the C-suite. Try not to burn it down. I smiled in the darkness of my apartment. James, I'm not going to burn it down. I'm going to build it properly this time, with architectural integrity that doesn't depend on ignoring the people who actually hold it up. At 11:59 p.m., my phone buzzed with the company-wide announcement. Nexus Technologies is pleased to announce the appointment of Emily Carter as Vice President of Data Architecture, effective immediately. Below that, in smaller text, the company also announces the departure of Mark Reynolds and Brad Thompson, who are pursuing other opportunities. Other opportunities, corporate speak for, we fired them so fast they left scorch marks. I opened my laptop and began typing commands, one by one. Systems prepared to come back online. Not because I had to, the contract didn't require me to start until morning, but because those systems were mine, had always been mine, and now, finally, everyone knew it. At exactly 6 a.m., as the sunrise painted my apartment gold, every dashboard at Nexus Technologies flickered back to life. The revenue counters resumed their climb. The data flowed. The company breathed again. And somewhere in his office, David Harrison was learning what I'd known for 3 years: the person who holds the keys to your kingdom should never be treated like a doormat. The price of that lesson, $10 million and 4 careers. The value of that lesson, priceless. My first day as Vice President of Data Architecture began at 7 a.m. sharp. I walked through the same lobby I'd entered countless times before, but everything felt different. The security guard who'd barely noticed me for 5 years suddenly knew my name. The executive elevator that had always required a special badge now opened automatically when I approached. The 6th floor, executive level, was a world I'd only glimpsed during quarterly presentations. Corner offices with actual walls, assistants who offered coffee before you asked, views that stretched across the city instead of facing another building's brick wall. My office, my actual office, not a desk in an open floor plan, had been Mark's. They'd cleared it overnight, leaving only the expensive furniture and the lingering scent of his cologne, which I immediately remedied by opening every window. On my desk was a single folder, damage assessment, the real cost of those 48 hours of downtime, not just the $10 million in settlements and penalties we'd already agreed to pay DataVault. The customer lawsuits totaling another $15 million, the emergency consultants brought in at triple rates, the SEC fine for inadequate risk disclosure, the market cap that had evaporated and might never fully recover. All told, my promotion had cost Nexus Technologies $37 million. I picked up my phone and called Richard Vaughn. Emily, or should I say, Madam Vice President. Richard, I said warmly, I wanted to thank you for your patience during this transition. My dear, you've made DataVault nearly $8 million in additional revenue from the companies trying to figure out how you built what you built. I should be thanking you. About those companies. Don't worry, your architectural innovations remain yours. We've had some very interesting calls from your former colleagues, though Brad Thompson reached out yesterday, claiming he could replicate your system for our competitors. And I told him that DataVault only works with authenticated expertise. He didn't seem to understand what that meant. I smiled. He never did understand authentication protocols. After the call, I walked the engineering floor. The developers who'd watched the collapse, who'd seen their former boss terminated and their systems saved by the woman they'd overlooked. They watched me now with something between awe and fear. All hands meeting, I announced. Conference room A, 10 minutes. When everyone had gathered, I stood at the front of the room where Brad had once delivered his leadership workshop. The irony wasn't lost on anyone. Let me be clear, I began. I don't lead through fear. What happened this week was not revenge. It was a correction. For 3 years, I've watched talented people in this room be overlooked, undervalued, and mismanaged. That ends now. Jake raised his hand. What about the systems? Are we safe? We're safer than we've ever been. I'm implementing redundancy protocols, alternative vendors, and architectural documentation that will prevent any single point of failure, human or technical. But more importantly, I'm implementing something else: recognition for actual contribution. I pulled up a slide showing the new organizational structure. Effective immediately. Promotions and bonuses will be tied to measurable contributions, not presentations, not politics, not whoever takes credit. The Git commits don't lie. The system logs don't lie. The innovation trail doesn't lie. If you build it, you'll be rewarded for it. Sarah spoke up. And if someone tries to take credit for our work, then they'll learn what Brad learned, that I have 3 years of documentation proving exactly who did what, and I'm not afraid to use it. The room was quiet. Then Tom, the senior engineer who'd confronted Brad, started clapping. Slowly, others joined in. Not the forced enthusiasm of corporate mandates, but genuine appreciation from people who'd finally seen justice served. 6 months later, I stood in the boardroom presenting our quarterly results. Revenue up 42%. System efficiency improved by 60%. Customer satisfaction at an all-time high. We'd not only recovered from the Carter crisis, as some media outlets had called it, but emerged stronger. David Harrison watched from his seat, his expression unreadable. After the presentation, he asked everyone else to leave. You know, he said once we were alone, I've been in business for 30 years. I've seen hostile takeovers, corporate espionage, market manipulations, but I've never seen anything quite like what you did. What I did was ensure my value was recognized. What you did was orchestrate the most elegant corporate revenge I've ever witnessed. You didn't just win, Emily. You made it impossible for us to do anything but admit you'd won. I gathered my presentation materials. David, for 5 years, I asked for nothing but fair recognition. I was patient. I was professional. I delivered exceptional results, and I was ignored. So I stopped asking and started taking. The only difference between me and the men who've done this for decades is that I used code instead of golf clubs. He stood, extending his hand. For what it's worth, I'm sorry it took a crisis to see your value. I shook his hand. For what it's worth, I'm not. If it hadn't happened this way, I'd still be fixing Brad's code at 2 a.m. while he took credit in the morning meetings. As I walked back to my office, my corner office with its view of the city, its walls covered with the patents I'd filed, the awards the company had won based on my innovations, I thought about the email I'd never sent to Richard Vaughn 3 years ago, the one that would have started this chain of events earlier. But timing, like code, is everything. You have to wait for the right conditions, the right dependencies to align, the right moment when the system is most vulnerable to change. Brad had provided that moment with his promotion. Mark had enabled it with his blindness. David had necessitated it with his indifference. And I had executed it with the precision of a perfectly optimized algorithm. The company lost $10 million, learning a simple lesson: the person who builds your castle holds the power to bring it down. The key is making sure they never have a reason to use it. My phone buzzed with a LinkedIn notification. Brad Thompson had updated his status, seeking new opportunities in technical leadership. I archived the notification without reading it. Some people never learn that leadership isn't about taking credit. It's about understanding who really holds the keys to the kingdom, and never, ever underestimating them again. Thank you so much for listening to this story. I'd love to know where you're tuning in from. Drop a comment below and let's connect. If you enjoyed this tale of corporate justice, please subscribe to the channel and share your thoughts. Have you ever experienced something similar in your workplace? What would you have done in Emily's position? Let me know in the comments.